We have covered people, either born there or who have called Suffolk their home. But today, the story of a man who would sadly meet his end in the county. Born to an old Russian dynasty towards the end of the reign of the last Tsar, he escaped revolution and came to Britain at a young age. He would become a renowned rugby player, only to lose his life young in a tragic plane crash in the first few months of the Second World War. Alexander Sergeyevich Obolensky was born on the 17th of February 1916 in the city of Petrograd, today St. Petersburg in Russia, the son of Prince Sergei Alexandrovich Obolensky, a captain in the Imperial House Guards of Tsar Nicholas II, and Princess Luba Naryansky from a noble family from Moscow. He was part of the Rubik dynasty, who could trace their roots back to 862 AD, and a king named Rubik, who, like many rulers from this time, seems to have a great deal of real history and folklore mixed around him. But today we are concerned with the 20th century, not the 8th. At the time of his birth, things were about to become very complicated for Russian nobility. The country, like many others, had been involved in the First World War since summer 1914 and was sustaining huge losses. Millions had been killed, wounded, or captured in battles against the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire, and the country was now beginning to crumble. Both civilian and military morale and tolerance was at breaking point. The nation was a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark would come in March 1917, when Alexander was just a year old, in his home city of Petrograd. What was known as the February Revolution ran from the 8th to the 16th of March, and would spread to the rest of the country, culminating in the October Revolution and the beginnings of the Russian Civil War, the abdication, arrest, and eventual execution of Tsar Nicholas, the rise of the Bolsheviks led by Vladimir Lenin, and much of the nobility fleeing for their lives to wherever would take them. The Obolenskys fled to Britain in 1917, settling in Muswell Hill, North London, near Alexandra Park. It should come as no shock that his family with influence and money, Alexander soon had an upbringing like many boys of the British upper class. He first attended Ash Boys Preparatory School in the village of Etwell in Derbyshire, where his aptitude for sports was first noticed, especially his incredible speed, before moving on to Trent College in 1929, aged 13, and then to Long Eton. In 1934, he got into Oxford University with a place in Brasenose College, where he studied philosophy, politics, and economics, where his academic abilities were discovered to be less than desirable. But he didn't mind. His real passion laid in sports. During his time there, he was awarded 2 Oxford Blues, sports awards for competing at the highest level of competition, described by Oxford University itself as the highest honour granted to an individual sportsperson and as a highly sought-after achievement for Oxford's student athletes. They were available for all kinds of sports, most famously would be the boat racing, but it also covers rifle clubs and in Alexander's case, rugby, where he had been playing for Oxford University's team. His playing had started back when he was in Trent in 1932. While there he had the incredible achievement of scoring 49 tries in a single season, and where he was noted as a particularly dangerous opponent due to his fast speed, where he could outrun almost any opponent on the pitch. Away from Oxford, he also played for the Leicestershire Tigers, as well as matches with Nottingham, Lincolnshire, Derbyshire, Rossline Park, and Midlands counties. His ability on the playing field soon attracted the attention of the England team, and in 1935 he was selected to play with them age 19 as a winger due to his speed, a topic of controversy at the time due to him not being a British citizen, with many saying this made him ineligible to wear the uniform of England. But nevertheless, he stepped out with the rest of the team on the 4th of January 1936 in Twickenham, in front of 70,000 people. For an opponent in your first national game, you couldn't pick much more of a challenge than who Alexander had to face. New Zealand, the All Blacks, a team that at this point England had never beaten. But those days were about to change. Before the match, there was another flare-up about his nationality, during a meeting between the teams and Edward, Prince of Wales, a man who was only 16 days away from being made King Edward VIII, who, when introduced to Alexander, made the comment, "By what right do you play for England?" To which he quickly answered, "I attend Oxford University, sir." So with that, the exiled prince put the future king in his place. Now, he would have to make sure everyone knew exactly why he was playing for England. Stepping onto the pitch, he had 80 minutes to do so. England would go on to beat New Zealand 13-0 in what was described at the time as a remarkable match with a still more remarkable result, helped in no small part by Alexander, who scored 2 tries, both in the first half of the game, including one where he outran several All Blacks across 3/4 of the pitch, which is still considered one of the greatest tries ever scored by the England team. After this, England would not beat New Zealand again until 1973. In the description below, you can find a clip from British Pathé of the rugby match and Alexander's astonishing run and try. His place in English rugby sealed, he went on to play with them 3 more times between January and March of 1936 against Wales, Ireland and Scotland. In March 1936, he had become a naturalised British citizen, something he had promised to do if it meant he could play for England. And there is some sweet justice that Obolensky's skills on the pitch would see him marked as an English hero, while by the end of 1936, Edward VIII was seen as a villain by many. He was part of the 1936 British Lions tour of South America and the United States, during which he scored 7 tries during an 82 points to nothing defeat of Brazil. He should also be noted for his peculiar pre-game ritual where he would eat a dozen oysters, and was also known as a big fan of champagne. But, for some reason after this, the England team decided to part ways with him. In 1937, he graduated from Oxford with a 4th class degree. Seemingly, he was not as academically skilled as he was on the playing field, although, while there, he did contribute to the book Be Still and Known, Oxford in Search of God. But with his education behind him, he turned his attention fully to his rugby. From 1937 to 1939, he would also play several matches with the Barbarians, where he scored a further 3 tries. In 1938, he was made a Knight of Sir John, as part of the Russian tradition in the Knights Hospitaller. But, with the world once again on the edge of war, Alexander would not stand idly by. He answered the call of his adopted nation, and joined the RAF in 1938, and was commissioned as an auxiliary pilot officer on the 12th of August 1939 in the 615th Squadron of the Royal Auxiliary Air Force, stationed in RAF Kenley in Surrey. His decision to join was not completely out of character. During his time at Oxford, he had openly stated he would gladly fight for king and country to save Britain from the fate that had befallen Russia, while much of Oxford Students' Union had declared that they wouldn't. When the Second World War began in September 1939, he was called up for active service, but there was little for RAF pilots to do in the early stages of the war, other than train and patrol. Even with the added pressure of the war and his military duties, Alexander still found time for his beloved rugby, joining a charity game of English and Welsh players versus Irish and Scottish, held in Richmond in December 1939, with all the money raised being given to the Red Cross, as well as a match against Wales, beating them 18-9 in March 1940, once again scoring a try, being chased by half the opposing team. It would be on the 29th of March 1940, during what was known as the Phony War, after the German invasion of Poland, before the invasion of France in the Low Countries. By now, he had been transferred to 504 Squadron, based in Digby, Lincolnshire, with a forward operating base in Suffolk. It was here that Alexander was undergoing flight training in a Hawker Hurricane Mark I. Undoubtedly, his spirits were high, with the recent Wales game under his belt, having just been promoted to full pilot officer, and just the day before he had learnt that he was going to be playing for England again, a game that he would never get to see. As he came into land, the part of flying he had often struggled with, and had said he enjoyed least of the entire experience, at RAF Mattlesham Heath near Woodbridge in Suffolk, his aircraft, plane L1946, overshot the runway and dropped into a ravine. In the impact, he broke his neck and was killed instantly, aged 24. Over his short life, he had gained the nicknames the Flying Prince, the Flying Slav, and to his friends, Obo. He had become a strange romantic figure, an exiled prince who could never go home, and starting during his years at Oxford, he had gained a dedicated following of female fans who often came to watch him play. He was buried in Ipswich New Cemetery with full military honours. He was the first English international player to die in the Second World War, a figure that would grow to 111 by the end of the war. His headstone bears the inscription, "His undaunting spirit and enduring qualities live forever in the hearts of all who knew him." Despite his short life, he clearly left an impression on his former teammates, with Bernard Gadney, who had captained England to victory over New Zealand, visiting his grave every year on the 29th of March until his death in 2000. Alexander Obolensky is remembered both in and out of the world of rugby. The Obolensky Lecture is held annually on the subject of rugby, and there is the Obolensky Suite named after him in Twickenham. A memorial stands to him in Cromwell Square in the Suffolk town of Ipswich, unveiled on the 18th of February 2009 by his niece, Princess Alexandra Obolensky. The statue cost £50,000, raised by backing from the Rugby Union, local businesses, and a number of private funders. It was sculpted by Harry Gray, who also created the Battle of Britain Memorial in Dover and the Codebreaker Memorial in Newmarket. There is a building named after him in Trent College where he studied, and a fictionalised version of him, or to be exact, his ghost, appears in the book Rugby Flyer, part of the Rugby Spirits series by Gerard Siggins. A somewhat fitting tribute, I feel, as his life does sound like something from a novel. During the unveiling of his memorial, his niece made the statement, "Who knows what he would have achieved but for the war?" And I can't help but wonder this as well. Would he now be a household name in England when it came to rugby? Or, alternatively, had he not died in that tragic accident in the March of 1940? Would he have made his name in British military uniform over the skies of Kent, like he had in the rugby uniform of England? What would he have made of the alliance between Britain and the USSR, led by the very people who had driven him from his home and killed his relatives? Some things we will never know. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. All of the information and pictures used can be found in the description below. Please feel free to like and subscribe if you wish. This was Alexander Obolensky, the Flying Prince, and this was a little bit of history.